Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today, I want to talk about a book that I read, one that is from an author that I've talked about many times on this channel before, but I'm always willing to talk about them a little bit more. And today's book is all about magical people and large ponds that serve also as oceans. I am referring to The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman, which was published in 2013. Take a look at that cover. There is a terrified little boy and a scary person. What does that mean? Watch along to find out. I've talked about Neil Gaiman on this channel before, so I don't need to go into too much detail again. But for those who don't know, Neil Gaiman is a British writer who's been writing since the 80s. He's known for writing the Sandman series. He's known for writing The Graveyard Book, Coraline, American Gods, which I really enjoy, among many other books. And a common theme of his writing is that of magic and of mythology. It really seems like Gaiman is building upon existing mythologies or trying to create his own in his writing. Talking of like tall tales, fables, grand characters, and heroic events and things like that. Not simply heroic events, but the underlying mythology, the underlying stories that are told. And whatnot. And I've come to really appreciate and really love Neil Gaiman's writing. I'm going to tell you right now that I really enjoyed The Ocean at the End of the Lane. So if you want to read it, go out and read it and then come back and check out this video, so I don't want to spoil anything too large for you. But without further ado, let's talk about The Ocean at the End of the Lane. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we'll move on from there. So The Ocean at the End of the Lane, it focuses on an unnamed narrator. Yet another example where I'm talking about an unnamed narrator, and I just want to say right here, name your narrators, name your main characters, people, because I'm tired of saying unnamed narrator. But the unnamed narrator is returning home to some place in England after having spent some time away. At least that's what they think. And they drive to their house when they recall that their parents sold the farm a while ago. And so they keep driving down the lane when they get to a place that they know as the Hempstock Farm. And they slowly make their way to the pond in the back that they have some hazy memories of. And the narrator recalls a specific event that happened in his childhood. And so much of the story takes place in that memory, where they recall meeting Letty Hempstock. Letty was a young girl who lived on a nearby farm, and he met her and became quick friends with her. They only knew each other for a short period of time, but their friendship seemed to be really strong there. And what's clear initially is that the Hempstocks are magical people. The narrator doesn't quite know what they are. They could be human, they could be something else. But the narrator never really questions any of this. And after all, who would the narrator tell? He's just a 7-year-old boy at this point. Nobody would really believe him. But the Hempstocks are very nice. They're just a group of women, including Letty, who is 11, but is actually way older than that. And they all seem to take well to the narrator, which is helpful because the narrator doesn't seem to have a very sturdy family. It's not physically abusive, but it does seem to be emotionally abusive. And near the start of the story, the narrator and Letty learn about a creature granting some sort of wish, some type of wish, and causing and disrupting this neighborhood, and it could spill out and disrupt the entire world. And so they head to the Hempstock Farm, which is actually larger than it appears to be and more magical, and they track down this creature. Letty appears to send it away, but as she's doing so, like, she tells the narrator to keep holding onto her hand, and he accidentally lets go, and he feels a sharp pain in his foot that he doesn't tell tell Letty about, but it does appear that the creature has been banished. When he gets home, he discovers that there is a hole in his foot, and when he picks at it, he encounters a worm, which he manages to get rid of part of it, but not all of it, and he's worried about what that's going to lead to. A short while later, his mom announces that she's going back to work, and so she's hired a nanny to watch over the children, and we're introduced to Ursula Monkton, which the entire family seems to love, except for the narrator, who is unsettled by her, and she quickly reveals herself to be that magical creature that they fought before, and who seems to be granting wishes and desires, and she does not like the narrator, wants to destroy him, but is keeping him around because her home is in his foot. It's her way back. But she's not going to let him leave the farm and talk to the Hempstocks because that would get her in a lot of trouble. So she just sets about making the narrator's life a little bit miserable, causing family discord, and even manipulating the father into trying to drown the narrator in the bathtub. Although Ursula says that wasn't her, that he was completely under his control, it seems a bit extreme for a father to do that to a son so easily. But luckily, while Ursula is trying to seduce the father, the narrator manages to escape to the Hempstocks, and in a pretty amazing, chase scene where Ursula is like coming down from the lightning itself, Letty stands up for the narrator and protects him from Ursula, sending her back to the narrator's household while the narrator stays at the farm. And the Hempstocks even manage to snip time and space in a way that they rearrange events so that the family believes that the narrator is just sleeping over with his friend Letty, but they do realize that they have to confront Starthak eventually, which he learns is the name of this of Ursula, like the real name, Starthak of the Keep. And so they decide to go back to the narrator's house, but Starthak is determined to destroy both the Hempstocks and Letty, although Letty just calls her a flea, holding on to reality, and is bait for something larger or something like that. And she gives Starthak an opportunity to leave, or else that she'll bring in the varmints, which are the powerful creatures that eat people like Starthak, sort of cleaners and whatnot. But Starthak does not really agree to this. So Letty just brings in the birds, which attack Starthak, and they want to attack the narrator for bringing Starthak into the world in the first place. But Letty instructs him to remain in a fairy ring, and she goes off to try to fix some problems. And while he's there, a bunch of imposters show up, including an imposter of his father, or maybe the original version. It's a bit unclear. Who tells him like, "Oh, you're not a good son," and the narrator tells him that, do you get great pride out of being mean to children? Does it make you feel like a big man? And it makes the father creature go away. Anyways, Letty comes back, and she transports the narrator in the pond water behind her house in a bucket, which is actually like an ocean that grants great knowledge. And the narrator wants to stay there, but Letty says that that's not the case. And so They try to figure out what to do at the Hempstock farm, but again, the narrator realizes that if they don't go out, the varmint birds are just going to stay there forever and eventually eat the whole world. And indeed, they do try that, because they see that the varmint birds, the hunger birds, are eating holes in reality and causing great problems. And the narrator decides that he has to sacrifice himself because he doesn't want his entire family to go. And so as he's doing that, they eat his heart, and it seems like they kill him. But Letty sacrifices herself in order to save the narrator. And the other Hempstocks come up and grab her as she's laying dead, and the birds have gone. They return her to the ocean, where she's not quite dead. She'll return one day, but she's not there anymore. She's kind of just a part of this ocean now. And the narrator notes that he's beginning to lose his memories because the Hempstocks are kind of manipulating that, letting him have a very normal life, and he seems to want to forget as well. And so life just moves on, and he just forgets about Letty over time. And the narrator then is back in the present, where he's an adult, and he learns basically that he keeps visiting the hempstocks over time. That this is not the first time. They kind of wipe his memory over time, and the narrator learns that this is the part of Letty. She wants to know: is it worth it? Was it worth saving the narrator? Like what happened to his life? Where did he go from here? It's a very touching moment, and the narrator even wonders if it was worth it. And as the story comes to a close, the narrator leaves the farm, and he sees that his mind is kind of fading again, and he's probably not going to remember it until he shows up the next time. And that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, there is a fair bit to talk about with the ocean at the end of the lane. I wasn't really sure where Neil Gaiman was going about 50 pages, and it seemed like he didn't really have a plan. But by the end of the story, it was really tugging at my heart, and I felt a lot. And there's a whole lot here that is worth talking about, and a lot that makes this probably one of Neil Gaiman's better books. And I'm pretty sure I say that after reading every one of Neil Gaiman's books, apart from the Graveyard Book, which sucks and nobody should ever read. But like, one of the themes that Gaiman is talking about here is magic. Like, this is nothing new. Like, anyone who's familiar with Neil Gaiman knows that he talks a lot about magic and world building. Like, Gaiman here is presenting a world of magic lurking in the shadows. It's not really out in the open like you would see with some of the stories he's writing, like Stardust. But with this world, it's kind of there, but nobody's really outwardly talking about it. Partially because the hempstocks work to keep it a secret in order to protect all of the people in the world, which they seem to love and want to see keep going. And a lot of this magic pertains to the hempstocks. They're thousands of years old, but they look just like a daughter, a mom, and a grandmother. You have the ocean of the story, the pond in the backyard, which actually is vast and lengthy, and the narrator is put into a bucket with that water, where he is able to know so many things and contain vast knowledge. And this bucket of water is much deeper, kind of an element of magical realism. Although I'm hesitant to call it that in this story, because if the entire story is magical, then it doesn't really seem like there's really too much realism there. I don't know. It's that's just my perspective on things. And then you have Ursula Monkton, who seems to come into this world through the narrator's foot, of all things. And she manipulates the world by granting wishes because it makes her happy, and it makes her mad to see that other people keep wanting things out of the world, which is a very interesting kind of villain dynamic there. And the way that Ursula is killed off is she's eaten by a bunch of birds who are too numerous to count. Like, the narrator notes, these birds must come from a world where there's no such thing as real numbers. Like, every time they count them, it ranges from like 2 to thousands, and the narrator just can't keep up with it. What's also interesting is the idea of snipping, how you can just alter reality by snipping and cutting around reality, and not quite changing time or anything like that, but just changing intentions and thoughts a little bit, allowing you to buy time until you fix the problem at hand, which I think is fascinating. And also the characters noting these aren't really spells, they're not actually witches, they're something else entirely. And I like that Neil Gaiman doesn't try to explain too much about the witches, doesn't try to offer something tangible. It leaves these women more mysterious, and I'm sure you could even write more about them down the road, which I would hope that Neil Gaiman would do. I want to learn more about Letty and the hempstocks and what their experience has been, maybe in the past, but maybe in the future as well. And what's also interesting is how this magic takes place in rural areas. Maybe Gaiman is arguing that magic rural areas are the only place that can really hold magic, because the cities have been discovered. There is no corner for magic to hide in the cities, but in the rural areas, there's still stuff that's kind of undiscovered, hidden away, and the hempstock farm is one of those hidden away things. So I do like that element of the story as well. Gaiman always presents magic in a way that I hadn't quite thought of before. Another very interesting element of the story is the horror. Gaiman isn't any stranger to writing about horror. Like, Coraline is a very spooky book in and of itself, But I feel like there's more elements of spookiness, more elements of horror in this story than in your standard Neil Gaiman stories. He like, and specifically the stuff that's scary in this one is more so like childhood fears, like things that children fear. Not so much things that adults fear, but things that are child focused. And you might think that like that would make this story not really palatable for adults, but I'd say you can still make things scary for adults even by focusing on childhood things. Like you focus on like your parents being abusive or something like that. You focus on Ursula. And specifically how she's sort of an interloper in the family trying to steal away the father, and also just being this utterly terrible babysitter, which is what a lot of children fear. Also, a little bit of talk of the future and how that's uncertain, which can scare a lot of kids, especially as they become more aware of concepts like the future as they get older. And then there's the idea of the hunger birds, the varmints that the hempstocks were talking about, and how they get at some really interesting fears that all children might have. Allow me to read you an interesting quote from this. "How can you be happy in this world? You have a hole in your heart. You have a gateway inside you to lands beyond the world you know. They will call you as you grow. There can never be a time when you forget them, when you are not in your heart questing after something you cannot have, something you cannot even properly imagine, the lack of which will spoil your sleep and your day and your life, until you close your eyes for the final time. Until your loved ones give you poison and sell you to anatomy. And even then you will die with a hole inside you, and you will wail and curse at a life ill-lived. But you won't grow. You can come out, and we will end it cleanly, or you can die in there of hunger and of fear. And when you are dead, your circle will mean nothing, and we will tear out your heart and take your soul for a keepsake." And that is a very intense quote. Like you have this, what is ostensibly, young adult novel, and here's like Neil Gaiman writing, you're always going to be wanting something more out of life and not quite getting it. And, that kind of applies to the fact that he has a bit of magic in him, and he's always going to be wanting to be a part of that world deep inside of him. But it could also just apply to children. Like when you grow up, you might not get the things that you want, that you're going to be missing a few things out of life and being unfulfilled. And as children become more aware that they're not, immortal, that there's death and concepts like that, like these are very real things that they're going to start to fear. And the narrator might start to fear as he becomes aware of the magic and the chaos of the world. And I really like how Neil Gaiman gets at that. It's one of the things where he treats young readers like they deserve respect, which again, a lot of authors, young adult authors especially, don't do that. But I really like that Neil Gaiman has done that here. Another interesting element of the story is the idea of the things we forget. Specifically, Gaiman is talking a little bit about memory here, because the story is presented as a memory. The narrator goes to the hempstock home and then begins to recall of the events of so many years ago that he had kind of forgotten about. And from there, you can kind of view the story like outside of its magical connotations. You can view it how a lot of childhood is forgotten, and that there's a lot that we don't remember or that we choose to forget, or that because our imagination is so vivid, we might be like, oh, that never happened. I imagine that. I'm not going to keep that memory or something like that. And it's harder and harder for us to remember bits and pieces of our childhood. Especially because like memory doesn't become fully intact until you're 8 or 9 years old. A lot of people don't have memories from around the time they were 5 or 6 or something like that. And so like that is sometimes the case for me. And sometimes, you'll even have like those recalls, those moments of memory where like, oh yes, that happened. And it's in a very specific place that it happens, like the narrator here in the story where they go to the pond and they suddenly recall that one specific event that they maybe forgotten or chose to forget. Because it's important to remember, the narrator wants to forget about this. When Letty dies, the narrator feels so bitter. They feel so sad, like, why wasn't it me? After all, the narrator was trying to sacrifice themselves. And Letty was like, no, you idiot, don't do that. And Letty sacrificed herself. And the narrator, doesn't want to probably remember, what happened to their heart, how it was eaten by the birds, and how they, lost a friend because of their stupidity, their childhood stupidity. And, there might be a great big feeling of grief, like a feeling that this is all their fault, and nobody really wants to recall such terrible events like that. And so in a lot of ways, they might be thankful that the Hempstocks keep causing them to forget, because that's not a memory that they particularly want to hold on to, that it's better that for them to move on with their life. It could be helpful to forget, although it does seem like there's something missing with their life, that maybe the Hunger Birds were right initially, about how there's always going to be a hole in their heart and they're going to want something, because they keep coming back. Sure, certainly it's because Letty keeps bringing him back, but also it might be the fact that the narrator has that guilt, that grief, and they need constant reminders that, oh, Letty's okay. One day she's going to come back and everything's going to be super amazing. And the narrator has that guilt, but they need to come back to be reminded that they were friends with Letty, and that there was something really special there, and that Letty isn't mad really. She just wants to see where the narrator's life led to. And the narrator is caught in that cycle of reminiscence there, which is really interesting. They're caught in a cycle of going, forgetting, going, forgetting, going. And that could be an element of horror, that cycle of being dragged back and then caused to forget, and being dragged back and never quite feeling like anything is really whole in you. Because as the narrator, or as the Hempstocks note, at one point he came back and was talking about the children that he just had and how he wasn't really confident there. But maybe, being reminded of Letty, being reminded that there is a decent part of him, that there was a great deal of friendship there, reminded the narrator that yes, he's okay, that he is capable of doing these grand things, that it's okay to worry a little bit, but it's also great to take action, like your friend Letty did. And it is certainly a bit selfish that Letty keeps bringing the narrator back, but it's that desire to know, was my sacrifice worth something? Is the narrator on the path of good things, of a strong path in life? And the fact that if he's not, how can I help him? Because his upbringing wasn't the best. There's a lot of questions there. And it's a very emotional moment in the story, and one that is really powerful, and it's just something I've never really read about before. Gaiman presents this in a very unique, interesting way, and it's something that my mind keeps coming back to as I think about this story. And there are other interesting elements of the story, like the emotional writing of what I just talked about. When we got to the very end of the story, the sacrifice of Letty was already emotional, but the fact that she keeps bringing him back, I teared up at that. That was really difficult to read. And I give great kudos to Gaiman for being able to write so effectively, and not only that, but also writing tense action, like the scene where Ursula chases the narrator in the middle of a lightning storm is amazing. It is wonderfully well written, and especially given that the first 50 pages are really hard to get into, because everything seems kind of vague and whatnot. Then Gaiman really makes up for that with his ability to write great action, to keep you hooked like that, and to bring it home with some strong emotion. And of course, there's also the myth making that I talked about earlier with the magic element, and Gaiman's good at that too. It really helps make the story feel epic and like something that could be passed down through generations. Of course, I do have a little bit of a problem with the story. The plot is a little bit vague, especially in the first 50 pages. It often feels like Neil Gaiman is gesturing at the plot, like he's gesturing at a corn stalk and saying, "Hey, this is a corn on the cob, go eat it." And you're like, I can't do that. It's still in the raw. draw. Like, that's not very helpful, Neil Gaiman. And the characters are that way too. You don't really learn a lot about the narrator, and you certainly don't learn too much about Letty, which is for the best at times, but also he could have fleshed out these characters a little bit more, given us something more substantial to hold on to. And I know that's a problem that Neil Gaiman has at a time. He's so focused on that myth building, or that magic that he's building upon, that he doesn't really think to focus on building, more three-dimensional characters at times. And that could really sink this book here. But again, I think the emotion and the tense action are enough to lift up the story and really carry it through. Anyway, those are my thoughts on The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman, which was a solid book. Really kick-ass book. I'm definitely going to recommend it to you out there. I feel I say that after many Neil Gaiman books, and it's good. Like, there's a reason I think he's such a well-regarded modern author, and that's because he really knows how to tell a story, and he really knows how to get at the emotion and make you feel for the characters that he's writing about. So I'm definitely going to recommend it. If you read it before, you simply want to comment on something I said here, do so in the comments below. I would love to hear from you. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and also join the Discord if you want to talk more about this book, or you simply want to share this with others so that they can become more aware of this author or this book if they don't already know. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and magic farm travels. Farewell.